Hi Five, Shannon. I just thought we've missed out on reading the last bit of our book, and I'm dying to know what happens in the end, and I'm sure you are too. So I'm going to read you this. Obviously, I don't want you to see me all the time, and you don't want to see me all the time. So what I'll do is I'll film the pages as I'm reading them. Okay, here we go.
Okay, here we go. We're going to start at chapter 9, Richard the Lionheart. When Friar Tuck returned from his pilgrimage a few days later, he was not alone. The one young man he had brought with him seemed sunk in a deep sadness. He stared about him in bewilderment as the outlaws crowded round him. "Who are you? Who is he, Tuck?" they asked. Friar Tuck waved them away with his sword. "Leave him be," he cried. It was then that he noticed that many of the outlaws were bandaged, that others lay stretched out under the trees. "Oh, God, what has happened here?" he said, suddenly alarmed. Marion was bending over one of the wounded. "Robin? Is Robin hurt?" cried Tuck, and much to his relief he saw Robin parting the crowd to get to him. The two friends hugged each other. "It's so good to have you back, Tuck," said Robin, and Tuck held him at arm's length, looking him up and down. "Not a scratch on me," Robin laughed. "Good as new." "But there has been a fight, hasn't there? What happened?" And Robin told him the whole story from the beginning, blow by blow. Friar Tuck listened in silence, his brow furrowing the whole while in fury. "The Abbess of Kirkley? It could be no one else," he said. "I told you about her, the sheriff's sister and Guy of Gisborne's lover. Had I been there, I would have known her. I'd know her anywhere. Fiendish witch that she is. Let me just come within a sword's length of her, by God's good grace." He shook his head. I should have been here. Only Marion seemed to be able to comfort him. "It's over, Tuck," she said. "What is done is done. Martin is safe, and the sheriff and his men stay inside the walls of Nottingham, too frightened even to come out. Better still, you're back home safe and well. We have missed you, Tuck. We didn't think we would, but we did." As the laughter died away, the young man whispered something into Tuck's ear. Tuck nodded and looked around anxiously. "Little John," said Tuck. "Where's Little John?" He grasped Robin by the arm. "He's not one of the 35. Tell me he's not." "Don't worry, he's fine," said Robin. "He's gone back to the battlefield again to collect the best of their swords. He won't be long." And the young man smiled for the first time. "You know Little John, dear?" Robin asked him. "Oh, he knows him." Tuck spoke for him and put his arm around him. "He knows him well. I tell you, this man is heaven sent. By God's good grace, heaven sent. Did we not pray every day for freedom and justice? Well, we will have them both, and soon, for God has heard us. This man is the answer to all of our prayers. With his help, we shall have our good King Richard back home where he belongs. We know the vile usurper Prince John scours the land for gold, claiming he needs it to pay the king's ransom. But we know, too, that the last thing in the world he wants is his brother back on the throne. Why else does Richard still languish in his Austrian dungeon after all this time? And it was not because of this that we collected the ransom ourselves and hid it away in our cave chapel, ready for the right moment. Now, by God's good grace, the right moment has come. We will pay the ransom and fetch back our king." "But how? No one knows where the king is," said Robin. Friar Tuck smiled. "This man does. Tell them, Blondel, my friend, how you found good King Richard. Tell them how you did it." The young man hesitated, looking to Friar Tuck for reassurance. "Don't worry yourself. They're an ugly bunch, but they're not as savage as they look. Speak up. Tell them what you told me in Canterbury." And so Blondel began. "I am Blondel. I am the king's minstrel. I was with him in the Holy Land. At the end of each day he always loved to hear me sing, and one song in particular he loved. It soothed him, he said, soothed away his worries and his pains. Sometimes we would sing it together. We called it the Candlelight Song, a flickering tune like no other I've ever heard. He was taken hostage on his way home from the wars, and like everyone else, all I knew was that he was being held by the Duke of Austria, but I did not know where. He has dozens of castles. It could have been in any of them. So for these last months I've wandered through Austria playing the mad minstrel. I could walk around each castle singing the Candlelight Song, hoping he would hear me and know me and sing back the song. Castle after castle I tried. And there was no answering refrain. I began to despair. The day I found him was a wild and windy day. I remember that because I had to sing out loud against the wind. I thought it was an echo I was hearing at first, but it was not. It was another voice singing the same song. I had found my master. His voice caught in his throat at that moment and his eyes filled with tears. I couldn't see him, only his hands on the bars of the dungeon window across the moat. But it was him, it was his voice. He could speak no more. And do you know what Blondel did? Friar Tuck took up the story. He did what any loyal Englishman would have done. Anyone who did not know our Prince John as we do. He came back to London and told Prince John where the king was being held. And what did our valiant prince do? Did he send men to besiege the castle and rescue his brother? Did he send the ransom money? No, none of these. Tell them what he said, Blondel. Blondel broke through his tears. He said that Richard could rot there for all he cared. The crowd murmured in indignation. And then, Tuck went on expansively, and then the miracle happened. By God's good grace, Blondel came to Canterbury, to the holy shrine, to pray for his master, and I was there at Vespers praying too. I heard beside me a man crying, this man. We got to talking outside the shrine. We ate together, and I confess it, we drank together too, and he told me his story. It was God's good grace that brought us together, and it'll be God's good grace that will take us over the seas to Austria to pay the ransom and bring our king out of his captivity. We will have his master home, and we shall have our king back on his throne, and justice at last in this land. He turned to Robin and patted his great belly. Well, and isn't it food time now, by God's good grace? Just then Little John came into the encampment, laden with swords. He saw Blondel, dropped the swords with a clatter, and ran to him and swept him up in a great big bear hug. What a feast they had that night around the fire. Blondel taught the outlaws the candlelight song, and they sang it again and again until everyone knew it by heart. As the outlaws sang, Robin planned. With Will Scarlet and his father and Marion and Little John and Much and Tuck, he devised how they might bring Richard safely back to Sherwood. All knew that there was no time to lose. The king would die in his dungeon. Prince John could pay the ransom before them and have him murdered. He was capable even of fratricide. They had no doubt of that. They had to move fast. The smelting of the gold began that night. It was to take all the next day for Little John to turn the gold chains and plates and cups and ewers and crosses into golden horseshoes. After all, as Little John said himself, you couldn't be too careful. With all those nasty folk about, thieving and everything they could lay their filthy hands on, nothing was safe these days, but horseshoes were safer than almost anything. No one ever stole horseshoes, and so that golden horseshoes would not wear away. Each shoe would be doubly shod, a shoe of solid gold and an iron one beneath it to protect it. Will Scarlet worked night and day at cutting and stitching until Robin and Much and Little John looked their parts, and that was no easy task. All three had to look like noblemen, like emissaries from the court of Prince John. They were to be accompanied by their holy friar, who insisted on a new habit of the best Irish cloth, and by Blondel, of course, who would travel as their servant, and therefore would need no new clothes. I shall call myself Robin, Earl of Locksley. Yes, Locksley sounds good, said Robin, dressed up in his finery for the first time, and parading like a peacock in front of Marion and little Martin that last evening. Marion smiled at him a little ruefully. Just don't ever forget who you really are, she said, and come back safe to Sherwood for me and for Martin. And so the next morning they rode away, their horses' hoofs glinting gold in the sunlight. But they were not glinting for long. By the time they reached London Road, the horses were covered in mud to their fetlocks, and the gold hidden from the world. Behind them they left the band of outlaws in the care of Marion, Will, and Robin's father, every one of them longing for the day that they would return to Sherwood with their king. They put up at an inn by the river at Southwark in London, a dingy, stinking place full of rats and filth, and that they were all glad to leave. The Seacroft was wretched too, and particularly for Robin. Heaving over the ship's side, he longed for the trees of Sherwood and for ground that did not move under him. It was made all the worse for him because Little John would keep clapping him on the back and telling him to cheer up. Robin had never before felt like strangling him. The roads through France were no better than in England. The early autumn rains had turned them into quagmires. Every river they came to was swollen and bank high. Fording was usually quite impossible, and there were often long detours to the nearest bridge. Then they would lose their way. Tuck's much vaunted perfect sense of direction was proved fallible on too many occasions. Every morning and evening Little John checked the horses' golden shoes, all 20 of them, to be sure that none had worked themselves loose. Being of softer metal, they flattened out more than iron shoes, but they were tailor-made to each hoof, and with a few nails from time to time they lasted well enough. Weary and saddle sore, it was a journey of 4 long weeks before they reached Austria and the Danube. When at long last Blondel saw the castle rising from the valley floor in the bend of the river, their sense of elation and relief banished at once at all thoughts of exhaustion. "That's the place," cried Blondel. "I've dreamt of it night and day." At Robin's suggestion, Blondel set off at once, alone, to find if the king was still there. They watched him ride slowly around the castle again and again before he came galloping back to them. He was breathless with excitement. "He's there! The king is there! He sang, he's there! I told him we brought him the ransom. We were taking him home." Okay, guys, I'm going to stop there for a little bit, and I will carry on tomorrow.